Hi, everybody. Welcome to my YouTube channel. It's Louisa Dent Pierce coming to you from the crazy, stormy southeast Queensland in Australia. I don't normally put storms behind me as my backdrop, but it felt appropriate today to honor the weather. As most people probably around the world know, we've been inundated with an extreme weather system known as Cyclone Alfred for nearly the last week. It's been, yeah, for the past week, it's been something that we've all been preparing for. The cyclone has now crossed the coast, passed, done a lot of damage on the way. I'm fine, I'm safe, and so is my family and my home and my chickens and my cat. um, but yeah, there's plenty of people who have suffered great losses, and it was also pretty scary to go through, regardless of whether it impacted you or not in terms of damage. So as the cleanup starts and residents all around southeast Queensland, there's about 4 million people affected in this area that live in this area, very spread out over several hundred kilometres. For those of you who don't know anything about Australia, that's a large chunk of our population, actually. So yeah, it's been quite an epic journey that we've all gone through. And when life calls you to just grind to a halt and all of your plans fly out the window and you have to go into survival mode and stock up your pantries and batten down the hatches literally and take care of animals and property and friends and check on neighbors and all of that stuff starts to happen. I was noticing this process in myself over the last week and reflecting on how it's so similar in some senses to a psychological breakdown or extreme state of consciousness like psychosis, because this impending weather system was coming our way whether we liked it or not. And you know, for all of us folks sitting here on the coast and for all of you who were probably watching on the news channels, there was there were many stages that we went through collectively and individually in terms of preparing for that. But at the end of the day, it is a force of nature and it is so powerful in its own right that you can't stop it. And so with that comes this kind of sense of surrender or leaning into the experience, which I thought was really valuable kind of lesson, like a take home that perhaps we could reflect on in the space of my YouTube channel. And I welcome your comments as well down below and any kind of thoughts that you've had about this, because I feel like there's so many lessons that we can take from nature and the world. The universe is fractal. There's self-repeating patterns in everything. So how we might respond to an extreme weather event like this is also how we might respond to an internal weather event. And particularly psychosis, because the energy of that is destructive and chaotic and crazy, and it tends to leave a lot of damage in its path as it comes through. So while I was reflecting on this, I've got plenty of time on my hands because we've all had to take time off work. So I wrote a blog article, which I'll link below, and you can read my thoughts in writing if you like. But I just want to now address the three kind of points that I made and see if they resonate with you. So the points are, there's really only three that I think are just really good take-home messages for us. The first is that the force is bigger than you. So with gale force winds, lashing rain, and a girth of several hundred kilometers, a cyclone is an awesome force to behold, and it cannot be held back by any human. Likewise, psychosis and psychological breakdowns are also forces. In the case of psychosis, the unconscious is a tidal wave that swamps the ordinary self. The waters of the dream world and the tremors of the body rush in, leaving a trail of destruction in their path. Logic and reason are uprooted like trees from the soil of the mind, inundated by dark thoughts, nightmares, and terrifying beliefs. The nervous system creaks and groans, giving way to insomnia, voices and visions, palpitations, and a cascade of cortisol and adrenaline. So if anyone has ever faced or gone through a psychotic type experience or some extreme state of consciousness like that, you will know that this force, this pressure, this energy that is building up inside you is something that you have to succumb to. It's greater than the ego. You know, the idea of the ego is kind of like this little, rather fragile, permeable membrane that surrounds us, our energy field, and creates our sense of self. And when the strong winds of the unconscious or the ocean of the unconscious start to dissolve that self membrane, the energies that can then rush in are much like those energies that burst the banks of a dam or crash onto the shores of a settlement like the beaches of southeast Queensland in the last few days. So there really is nothing that we can do other than stand in utter awe at the force of this nature. You know, I remember I used to sometimes question if I could have done something to stop my psychosis, and I honestly believe I couldn't. You know, even now, years later, looking back with all the hindsight and wisdom that I have, I believe it was a force that needed to happen, needed to come out, and needed to be reckoned with. So that's the first point. The second point is there is no choice but to surrender. So off the back of the first point, if the force is bigger than you, there comes a point in your egoic consciousness where you just have to let go. You have to accept that this is happening to you, and the struggle and the resistance comes to an end. So there is a period of struggle and resistance usually of what the hell's going on? How can I control it? How can I stop it? What can I do? But much like the Cyclone Alfred, there comes a point of surrender. And I felt it so poignantly when the cyclone was coming towards us. We had prepared all we could, and the preparations are kind of a mild, subtle form of resistance, right? Because we're trying to control. Of course, we are. We don't want anything damaged, and we want everybody to be safe. But once all those preparations were done and there was nothing else to do but just sit on my porch and listen to nature, feel the gusts that were coming in through the forest where I live. And I'm 70 kilometers from the sea, so I'm a long way from the coast, actually. But I could still feel the gusts as the cyclone was approaching the coast. And it was quite awesome to sort of sit on the edge of that cyclone and feel that wind and be in a state of surrender to it. In that surrender, you know, that one finds that it's actually sweet. It's the ego that fears the surrender, but once we actually do sit back into the surrender and let go, it brings things like relief and a sense of peace and calm. It's really quite beautiful. And it's also my feeling that as we die, when we actually leave this mortal body, unless we die in a traumatic situation, it's the same surrender that has to occur in the consciousness. So, you know, psychosis is a type of death and rebirth, and I'll touch on that more in just a second. But so too is a cyclone, a death and a rebirth. So with it comes that surrender. That's the pre-death is the surrender, is this moment when we just sink in and we relax into the experience. I'll just see if I wrote anything else that was worth saying. I'll read a little out. Sure, so you can sandbag your house, secure the windows, and prune the trees. These things will help you, but they don't stop the cyclone. At some point, you'll have to hunker down in the walk-in wardrobe with a torch and a prayer while the winds swirl around you and the house shudders. If you're unlucky, the roof will blow off and there'll be no protection at all, which is, if I had to make a correlation, that would be a bit like with psychosis, not having the shelter of family or a home or somewhere to be. And there are plenty of people that go through psychosis that are just out there, like wild, you know, blowing around like tumbleweeds because for whatever reasons, multiple reasons, they've lost everything or they're rejected by society, they're misunderstood. That's just how life is evolved around them. So there's no judgment there, but some of us are luckier than others. I had shelter, I had protection, I had somebody to look after me. Um, Regardless of your situation, somewhere along that journey, you'll find yourself surrendering. You realize that you can't change things and you're being swept along for the ride. When you surrender, your mind lets go of trying to control the outcome and you accept that this is happening. And then something magical and unexpected happens. The space inside you that was filled with fear and resistance is now occupied by a sense of peace, relief, curiosity, awe, and even profound joy. There were many moments while in psychosis when I felt that bliss of simply letting go, as though I was falling into the arms of life itself or into the ecstasy of divinity. It was a state of consciousness where I lived only in the present and felt deeply at home, and which felt more real than the flesh and bone world. So I hope I can convey there that it can be a really, truly beautiful experience of surrendering. And likewise, for those folks who went through the cyclone or any natural disasters, yeah, it might not seem like an obvious capacity that we have to get into that state of consciousness. And I'm not suggesting everybody would have done that, but certainly there would have been many of us who did. Okay, and the last point I wanted to make was that ultimately it's a rite of passage through destruction and creation, right? And we are talking now also about death and rebirth, as I mentioned earlier. So when the wind has blown its last gust and the rain stops falling, there is the shock of the destruction that one must face. Crumpled homes and buildings, ancient trees toppled, beaches eroded, roads collapsed, and perhaps even lives lost. Somehow we must take in these scenes and realize that the landscape is changed forever. In psychology, there is a term, it's shattered assumptions, which is used to describe great loss, whether physical or psychological. All too often, our view of life is bound up in assumptions that the world, people, and our own identities are somehow absolute or static. Yet with one event, everything changes, and we must then rearrange our worldview to encompass a more humble position of our own place in it. So certainly that happened to me. I was deeply humbled by the experience of psychosis. Much like a person viewing their entire home destroyed by a cyclone is humbled by your relationship to all that is, to the vastness, to the greatness of Mother Nature, to God, to whatever consciousness or word or label you want to give to that force behind this. That it's very humbling to realize, just how kind of small and I don't want to say insignificant, because you're definitely not. You're a particle, a fractal of the whole, so you are the whole. But it's that ego that's small and insignificant. It's that house that's small and insignificant that can just be blown away with a puff of wind. Yeah, so that can cause this phenomenon of shattered assumptions, and it's a shock. It'll be shocking, the feelings that will come with that. There might also be some other emotions there that are, part and parcel of grief, essentially. So we're talking denial. This can't be happening, right? Just can't compute. We're almost like cognitive dissonance. We can't accept what we're seeing. Anger that this happened. Blaming maybe yourself, maybe someone else, maybe the Bureau of Meteorology because they didn't warn you enough, right? Blame. And yeah, of course, sadness, sorrow, despair at the loss. So if we relate this back to psychosis, as I continue to write, there is nothing quite like the cyclone of psychosis to wash away assumptions about who or what you think you are. The inner world and personality comes crashing down, revealing itself for the construct it always was. And we are left with debris that often doesn't make sense or seems broken beyond repair. So certainly that was also the case for me. The humility came because prior to my psychosis, I was fairly well functioning, and I had a job and a relationship, and on the surface things looked pretty good. But the despair and the wreckage, the carnage afterwards was yeah, it was intense. I mean, my whole life fell apart, and I couldn't work or converse with people or do normal things like go to the supermarket. I was utterly incapacitated and debilitated by what happened, and the wreckage, the cleanup lasted years, to be honest. But particularly the intense period of the first year was a lot of picking up those pieces and trying to kind of figure out if I could build a house again. And the house is the metaphor for the ego here. Could I build an ego out of this rubble? The answer is yes. So I did build a much better house, if you like, because the house that I'd already constructed was not going to withstand a storm. It was weak. It had weak foundations. It often felt threatened. My sanity, my fragile ego was constantly being threatened. I was walking around with so many insecurities about who I really was, and what I kind of sensed was underneath everything, which was a lot of fear and shame for me. So once it had given away, then I was able to rebuild. And as I continued to write, therein is the gift. As the ancient Vedic teachings remind us, destruction begets creation, and thus the world is created and destroyed again and again for eternity. And so it is with us. The death of the old self is the birth of the new self, and the psychosis acts as a great purifier of all within the subconscious that needs to be seen and released before something new can emerge. And so nature asks of you, can you surrender to the forces within and without and allow that which is greater than you to unfold in its divine wisdom? Better yet, can you surrender sweetly with a deep breath and a heart wide open, present to being with what is? So therein lies as well the rite of passage, right? This is an initiation. A rite of passage is any event in which we are changed forever, deeply changed. And we don't always come out of that better. I understand that human beings can suffer things and feel very broken afterwards, but there is always the potential to come out better. And we're designed in a way to do that, to heal, to be self-repairing as an organism psychologically and physically. And while there is an end date to that, and of course we eventually expire and pass away, and our bodies do age, the consciousness, the mind in particular, is capable of staying wholly new, being born again, being fully born again. This is the path of the mystics and the path of the sages, and the spiritual paths often point in that direction towards a state of being reborn into a kind of an innocence, a childlike consciousness, yet retaining all of the wisdom and the lessons and the gold of all the things we've gone through and learned. So yeah, if we can approach life in that way, we can weather any storm. Yeah, and so it is. I hope that was helpful for some of you. My heart goes out to you if you are suffering right now and you've experienced a lot of damage or loss, and there's no doubt that is a very painful experience. So yeah, I'm sure that you can, hopefully, if you just sit quietly and tune into the consciousness of the collective, you will feel the manifold prayers that are coming in your direction, the goodwill, the love that is there. And I certainly have felt that as a Queenslander. And the last thing I want to say is thank you to all of those people out there who have sent us your prayers and your good wishes, because I can feel it in the collective energy, and I'm very, very grateful for that. It gives me deep hope. It fills me with joy. to witness the potential of humans to just love each other in times of stress and difficulty. So thank you. Okay, take care everybody out there, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.